Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Pedigo. I was clerkship director for 5 years at Harbor UCLA Medical Center and then transitioned to being an associate program director. So I have a little bit of experience in kind of both worlds. And I'm going to talk about navigating VSAS or VSLO and choosing away rotations. And so this is kind of going to piggyback off of everything that Dr. Gisandi and Dr. Hiller have talked about. And this is one of the most kind of pivotal decisions that you're going to make going into your fourth year. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I don't have too many slides because I want to keep it open for questions. How many people in this room, it looks like maybe about 30 or 40% have already gone through this process? All right, raise your hand. Okay, so everyone who hasn't gone through that process, okay, keep your hands up just for a sec. So everyone who hasn't gone through that process, find somebody with their hand up during lunch, because actually it's going to be really, really, really important to talk about their experiences and get their input on how to do this. So the objectives here are going to be really simple. Know where to rotate, right? Know how many sub-Is to do, and know where to look for rotations. There's going to be more about how to do well in your rotations and what are slows and how to and all that later. This is really deciding where you're actually going to put your time in during your fourth year. So where do you rotate? Based on, first you have to take a stock if you have a home rotation, right? What is the makeup of that home rotation? Because just like you saw in the last talk, right, there's academic programs, there's county programs, there's community-based programs, right? So, I work at Harbor, right? And so when they were talking like knife and gun club or whatever, right? Like that's what we do, right? And so that's totally different, right, than a lot of other programs. And how do you know if you want to dedicate 3 or 4 years of your life to that type of program, and if it's going to reflect likely the type of practice you want to do after residency, right? You come to Harbor and then you're like, oh, actually I want to work like in a rural like community thing at like Kaiser or something like that, right? I mean, that's still fine, right? But it's just a different type of training that you're going to get. And you'd ideally like your training to best match what you anticipate, although it's very early, obviously, like what your career goals are going to be, right? So for me, I would recommend using Match. I think it's probably the most user-friendly thing. So Match has basically like a search engine where people are, you can look up clerkships and residencies. So you can look up clerkships, and on the clerkships, it'll actually tell you, who the coordinator is if you want to reach out to them. Do they participate in VSAS? So like Dr. Gisandi gave a talk first, their program doesn't participate in VSAS. So you won't find them on VSAS. They have a separate application system, which is the minority of programs, but some programs do have their own application service. And you'll want to know, if you have to anticipate that, and then start collecting all the documents that you might need for those type of programs that don't participate in VSAS, because it's not going to be like a one and done where your transcript's uploaded, et cetera. They're going to have a totally isolated, application process. And so just make sure that you know for what types of programs you'd like to apply to, what the requirements are. And really applying early is by far. If you literally didn't, I don't know what happened there, but if you literally don't listen to anything else, just make sure that you apply like as early as humanly possible, okay? So that's perfect. So when I choose visiting sub-Is, right, it's unlike the match, which is a reasonably orderly process, right? You get time to think about it, you put in your preferences, it goes into a computer, and it spits out, right? VSAS is more like a dumpster fire, right? So the day it opens, I'm like, okay, the clock is ticking. Like, I got to get these applications and invites out, because if I don't, all these other programs are putting out their invites, and then those students are going to have to decide, am I going to accept this invite? Am I not going to accept this invite? There's no orderly process. It's not like we're going to give you all your menu options, right, on like one time. It's like tray pass appetizers, but you might never see that person again, right? And so it's like, ooh, do I want this tartare? Do I going to wait, right? Like, if you basically are going to get it like one shot, they're going to be like, you have 2 weeks to decide yes or no, right? And so we know as programs, we're on the clock. So as soon as I can see those applications, I have to review them, I have to rank them, and I have to get invites out ASAP, right? And if you apply 3-4 weeks after VSAS opens for me, I have filled 100% of my slots. You are applying into a 0 slot situation, and VSAS, oddly, will still take your application fee, and you will get absolutely nothing for it, okay? Because like this is like total cash grab, right? But it's absolutely insane. So you have to apply literally as early as humanly possible, because we will, yes, of course we will still like have people who late cancel and stuff like that, and we'll still review applications, but like 95% of the slots are filled on like a one and done basis. A program's gonna sit in a room, we take our residency leadership, we take our clerkship leadership, we take our chief residents, and we have our equity and inclusion committee, and like we just sit down, we look at all the applications holistically, I've abstracted all of them, and then we make decisions. So if you're not applying on day one, you are going to be very, very far behind. Anticipate some of the things that will take time, like a letter of rec, right? So a lot of programs require letters of rec, right? And so if you're waiting like on a letter of rec and that forces your application to be late, like that is gonna hurt you. So make sure that you are like looking in advance and being like, okay, like I need a letter of rec, I need this, I need that, right? And have all your ducks in a row, so that way you don't have to stress out that you're gonna have a late application. Like 1 day late, probably okay, but we're gonna start like looking at apps like, because we know it's just a free-for-all with all these programs, and so we know we have to look at them and we have to get decisions out ASAP. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Ask people at your school, like from the year before, what the holdup in like your dean office are.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely students who are like, I think my application's in, or like, and it's like, that letters of rec, or just the dean's office, so you kind of know just how early you have to be to sort of be in that line. And I do think, at least at UT Southwestern, like this year was a little bit. It's changed a little bit in terms of like the jobs report and the downstream effects and things like that. So I think it's okay to inquire to admin, hopefully like, are there still spots? Like if you
Yeah.
kind of consider late and things like that. Like things do happen and change. But yes, the idea that VSAS is going to let you know don't apply to this block because that block is so oversubscribed is false. And that's upsetting and it's a flaw. We're not getting the money.
Yeah, I get literally, I get no money from almost anyone ever. I'm a county employee, right? So my loans are getting forgiven in 2 months, though, so that's okay. Yeah. 10 years.
Required for a school like a deed, like it's just not fair. It's just so, but it is frustrating.
Yeah, if you are gonna late apply, definitely reach out to the coordinator and just be like, hey, what's the situation, right? And like that's totally fine. I saw a hand up, yeah.
So I have a question on it. So let's say a student accepts an offer and then later on, maybe a month or two out, gets another offer that's more desirable than
Mm-hmm.
How horrible would it be for the program that they had already accepted with to say, oh, sorry, we changed our mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, first off, I know that this is a very flawed process, right? And so I send out invites all the time, and they're like, I am super interested, but I've already accepted another slot, like, sorry. That's totally fine. If they say yes, and then they email me later saying like, oh, I had a scheduling conflict, which is like kind of code speak for like, hey, like, I got invited to the prom, but then somebody else I like better asked me, right? And so I got to find a way to get an out, I get it, right? I think honestly, personally, and this is just me, I think that's fine too, right? Now, if you do that like within a couple weeks of the rotation starting and you'd committed for like a few months, then yeah, I think that to me would be like, would I want to use an interview invite on someone who like is that, became that disinterested in rotating with us, right? So that one, honestly, if it's like kind of like a short notice change, I think that would probably be looked at as negative, just because if you decided, unless there's like extenuating circumstances, right? If you did it to rotate somewhere else, which obviously we'll see because we'll get your transcript when you eventually apply, if you apply. If you change like one rotation for another with very short notice that you committed to for months, I would call into question whether or not we should probably interview that person. So for me, that would be a negative. But we know that right around the times that invites go out, there's going to be a lot of shuffling that occurs because it's not an orderly process, right? I don't know if others have.
A lot of people doing the same thing at that time, right?
Yep.
Early on. When it's later on, and this is also, if you just think about it, like the so early on, oh, okay, no, this person's not coming anymore. Okay, that's fine. Yep, got to do this. When it's 3 weeks before the rotation, and then it's like, oh, I got to try and fill a spot. I got to call the registrar's office to see if they can still process this other student, and da 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 da. Am I more likely to remember that student's name? Because again, that's what you're counting on, right? Like, does this person inconvenience me enough that I care enough to say, hey, pass that on to someone else? Hey, I remember this name when they're telling us, like, yep, I want to interview at your spot, number one, you're my favorite program. Because, like, no, we're not their favorite program, right? Like, again, so I think it's really, if you're professional about it, if it's early, if it's close, and there's particular circumstances, but otherwise, like, hey, you made a commitment. And, you know, the better looking prom date came along, but, like, you kind of said you'd go with someone. So I think that you kind of have to realize, if it's early, yes, we have a lot. If it's later,
So we say early and late, right?
Yeah.
And like some programs are like, oh, we'll let you know, we'll start letting you know like March 1st, and some programs are like May 1st. So
Yeah.
what is early and what's late?
That's honestly, that's why this process like sucks so much, right? And like, you know, I mean, the right way to do this, especially since they're like taking all your money, right? The right way to do this would be like, you know, a process where it's basically like, you know, these are the places that you can choose from, right? And then you choose, and then everything's fine, right? Yeah, that's really tough. And for me, it would depend on when your rotation is. So like if you scheduled, like let's say you in March 1, I say, okay, yeah, we have a spot for you at Harbor, and like, you know, we have a June rotation or something. And then like you learn mid-May about another one. I think that's too, yeah, that's, you know, like, it would be nice, honestly, what they need is a unified release date, right? And so you just get a bunch of emails, right? And like then you just say like, okay, I want this one and this one and this one, and like that would just be like incredibly better. So, yeah.
Does it help? This is advice that like we received.
Yeah.
I don't know if it helps you guys. I'm just curious. Like after you get an acceptance or whatever, and you say, "Yep, that's fine, whatever," to like withdraw all the other ones. Does that help you guys? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, logistically, it's much easier, I think. Yeah.
What's the protocol on like calling coordinators and asking for an update on your application?
Yeah, I think I would say email's probably easier because then the coordinator can get get to it when they have an update. I think it's totally reasonable to email coordinators for updates. I actually also think that I am totally 100% fine if people emailed me directly as the clerkship director, not for application updates, but if someone said like, hey, like my extended family's in south of Los Angeles, right? You know, and I'm like incredibly interested, like something that I wouldn't necessarily know on the application that might change my calculus a little bit, like that's totally fine for me too. But yeah, coordinators I think is totally fine to email updates to, and I think it's fine also if a place is truly like your absolute like top choice and you would 100% commit to it and like you have a specific reason for it, then I would say that it's probably also reasonable to reach out to the clerkship director for that. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
They accept it because the timer is ticking, and they still won't hear from their first school. So if you withdraw your application from your number one school because you have an acceptance already within the location, does the number one school look at that later on and go like, this person is actually like considering this location, we should consider this person?
So I would say, yeah, if you withdraw from an application, I would say that has zero impact on your residency application, like 0.0%. Because we all know that there's so many things that go into like the order in which you get rotations, like your school schedule, like when you actually have a block, if the blocks conflict, right? Yeah, if you withdraw from from a sub-I, before you've gotten an acceptance, or even withdraw an acceptance before committing to it, 0.0% chance that it will affect your residency application.
Does it benefit that student though to accept
I would say, I mean, it helps you know if you want to live in that location and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say it like really changes a whole lot unless like your whole life is in some hyper local area. Like going elsewhere, it just shows like programs maybe that you're mobile. But for many programs, it doesn't matter. Like people will be like, oh, I've never lived in California. Like will that be a red flag or something like that? Like I get that a lot, right? It's like, no, it's like you know, even if you've never like lived in California, if you're applying there, it's not like I have to like convince someone like, hey, it's 72 degrees and sunny 365 days a year, you know, like, you know, you can live a block from the beach and like run along the ocean, like, you know, I'd be like, man, are they really gonna buy that? Like, you know, like no, like the opposite might be true though, right? I grew up in California. I did undergrad and med school and residency and faculty in California. Like when I applied outside of California, right? People were like, are you really going to leave? And I was like, yeah, and then I didn't, right? So I mean, their fears were well-founded, right?
Well, yeah, and that's what and I think we actually talked about that at the mentoring session. I grew up in Cleveland, and I went to Ohio State for undergrad and med school, and I did my away rotation in Cleveland, and I think it did negatively impact the geographic diversity of my application, and I really wanted to go to the Southeast and wound up matching at Wake Forest, but I didn't get as many interviews in that area, and I think it was because Cleveland, Ohio State, this guy's not leaving. So I actually do advise if you're trying to geographically diversify your application to think about some of those things. And also as someone who lives in Columbus, we do have to sell people on we're not a block from the ocean.
Yeah, see that part's true.
It's a big ass block
that
from
part's
the
definitely
ocean.
true. But yeah. Oh, I think I saw here, and then there's one back there. Oh, you got answered? Perfect. All right, we'll go here and there. You will hear about that, but in general, you shouldn't use it for your home or places that you rotate. But there's going to be a talk on that later, which will go into it. But it's already assumed that you have a preference for a program if like you rotate it there.
The programs tell you if you apply to a way rotation, they tell you no quickly as well as telling you yes quickly.
So yeah, that's another like it depends. So hopefully, yeah, I mean this again, it's because it's so like, you know, you can ask the clerkship director or coordinator like probably coordinator, like when you expect to make decisions on applications. And it's totally fine also, like in that if you apply to a bunch of places in LA, right? Like let's say you get accepted at UCLA, but you really wanted to rotate at Harbor or something like that because you wanted a county rotation. It's also okay for me if someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I have an acceptance, I have to make a decision in a week, like, you know, but I would rather rotate at Harbor. Do you know if like a decision will be made in the next week, right? And I might even just look at the application and be like, yeah, we'll take you, that's fine. Like that's like totally fine. If you're like up against a time crunch where you have to like pull the trigger on another application, yes or no, I think it's fine to reach out to your like #1 program if it's gonna create a schedule conflict, right? To be like, hey, I have to make a decision this week, like, and we might say like, honestly, we're not gonna be reviewing apps for another few weeks, and you know, so then you'll just have to make your decision based on that. And I think I saw a hand there. Yeah, so we fill, in one kind of fell swoop, we basically like meet, look at however many applications we get, and then make decisions. And yeah, usually all the slots we fill through like almost November in one day, basically, yeah. Which day that is like totally random. So we briefly talked about all this stuff. Rotating somewhere is the singular best thing you can do to change your spot on someone's rank list, right? Usually for the better, occasionally for the worse. But I would say that, like, you know, we are going to interview like 100 people on Zoom, right? And then we're going to have like, you know, their applications, their CVs and stuff like that. And they're going to put like their best self forward. And if they don't, that's probably a huge red flag that you can't keep it together for a Zoom call, right? But we know that if we've seen you for a month, like we know who you are, right? Like we know what you're like at 2 in the morning, right? You know, and so that for us, it's like, you know, it's we know what we're getting, right? We don't really know what we're getting when we make our rank list. We have some idea. We have slows and we have like, you know, whatever. But we kind of know what we're getting, but we know exactly what we're getting if you rotated with us for 4 weeks, right? Because you're not gonna like put on a front for 4 weeks and then come as an intern and be like, just kidding, right? So like we know, and the same thing will be true for all of you. It's the singular best thing you can do to get to know a program, right? When you're on a Zoom call, the program will be like, we're great, we have no problems, like everything is phenomenal, right? And then you'll come and rotate at Harbor and you'll be like, wow, this cafeteria food is absolutely terrible, right? And it's free, but it's terrible. You know, finding parking at 4 p.m. is a nightmare because we're building a new hospital, right? But, you know, those are things that you'll actually get to see by being in a program for 4 weeks. Because also we can't put up like a front for 4 weeks and be like, hey, everything is perfect, right? You'll actually get to see what the program is truly like. And so for both sides, for you and for us, it's probably the singular best thing you can do. But you have to choose that place wisely, because you also want to rotate at a place where if you knock it out of the park, like you're very likely to match there, right? So that's why choosing that place is so critically important. You know, whether it's academic, county, community, you know, make sure it's a good fit for your application. If there are special interests you have, right? Like LA County is the largest EMS system in the country, and you know, our faculty at Harbor run that system. And so if you're interested in like pre-hospital medicine, then maybe you'd be like, oh, maybe I should rotate at Harbor, right? Mike Gizandi's got like a lot of stuff in like medical education, and so if you're really interested in med ed, then maybe you want to do that, right? So making sure that it, you know, if there are special interests you have in EM, finding a program and rotating there can really help you out. Very lastly, because I think I'm running out of time, very much so, right? Okay. How many rotations? So this Coalition for Physician Accountability during the pandemic came out with recommendations. They didn't do that this year, so SAEM and CDEM and RAMS and CORD came out with their own thing, which basically says you should probably have 2 slows. And in some circumstances, like if you're an MST program, like MD PhD student, you may have a third and like talk to your advisor basically, but the defaults for like 95% of you is 2 slows in your application. Just know when you apply, once you assign a letter to a program, that is an irrevocable action and you can only have 4 letters. So if you're gonna have a slow coming in, let's say slightly later, right, don't assign 4 letters to that program because then you have no space for your slow, right? So just make sure that you don't max out if you anticipate having like a later slow being added to your file, which is totally fine, but you can't like undo a assignment of a letter to a program to make space for your slow. Yeah.
Say you're in an institution that has a home EM program.
Yep.
So you're going to get 1 slow from your home, and then you're doing 2 away rotations. Do you get 2 slows from your aways, or do you only get 1?
So yeah, you basically must, quote unquote, get a slow from every sub-I that you do, because if not, we'll be like, why did you rotate there and then not get a slow? Like that might be a little weird. That said, if you're rotating somewhere ultra late, like December, January, once your transcript's uploaded, we have no idea what you're doing for the rest of the year, right? So like, you know, if you're when I have students rotate that late, I actually just tell them straight up, like, you probably shouldn't get a slow, or like, oh, you should probably get a slow, right? In July, they have no choice, right? You got to get a slow, right? But in December, I can be like, nobody knows you're here. So, you know, so it's a little different. But in general, you should have 2 slows. So if you have a home, that would only be 1 away. That said, if you're, you know, talk to your advisor about that. But the position statement is most people should have 2 slows. So that would be 1 home and 1 away if you have a home. If you don't, 2 aways. Yeah.
So just to emphasize that, what you described is you're in the 5% outlier.
Yep.
So ask your advisor why you have 2 aways if you have a home rotation. Because most students maybe, because I was telling someone at speed mentoring last night, I've seen that hurt people. You go do your 1 away, you kill it, you get honors, and then you go do your 2nd away and you get satisfactory, and it's a weird letter, and now nobody knows what to do with this thing. So just talk to your advisor or one of us about why you have a home institution and you need 2 aways, because most students don't.
And just to drive home that point, remember that most of us are average, and the more letters you get, the more likely you'll be normalized to average. So I think oftentimes students think like, oh, I'm going to get more letters and I'm going to crush it. But the statistics would show that the more letters you get, the more likely you will look like everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? You've now done emergency medicine
that's a good point. I think ultrasound and those other things are a good way to like backdoor kind of see a program, because then you have basically like almost no responsibility and you get to actually like see what the program is like. So that's a like nice low stress way also. So I think there were two questions, one here and then.
In terms of the timing, so you're talking about like obviously June is like good, December is like really late.
Yep. So September, I would say, is the latest if you need that slow to be visible on day one where we can see your applications. Because like, let's say you finish late September, there's no way you're getting that slow before we actually see someone's application for the first time on ERAS. That said, that's probably okay as long as you have one slow. But usually, if there are 0 slows, we're gonna just like kind of put your like app on the back burner, and then we'll just take a look at it when it's updated. But ideally, in a perfect world, you would have 2 slows visible on your application day one where we can see your ERAS application. Ideally, that would be like perfect. Doesn't have to, but. All right, and that was the reason I only had 5 slides, because I figured I would go over regardless of number of slides. So I'm like totally out of time, right? Like ultra out of time? Yeah.
I think we're good.
Pretty much.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have
I mean,
other
if you-
questions, I'll be here for lunch. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.